What's up, human beings? So today we're talking about how to get bigger quads with less weight. So I just finished with my workout, I'm walking around. Let me know if you like this style of walk and talk video. Now the first thing, and probably the most important, is to know your positions.
Wow.
No, not those positions. What your body is doing. So what are your knees doing? What are your hips doing? What is your torso doing? What is your lower back doing? If you want more quad stimulation, you want the knees to go forward, which means that your torso is going to be more upright. If your knees are not going forward much at all, your torso is going to be more inclined. Everything affects everything. You cannot have knees forward and torso inclined. That just wouldn't work. Or vice versa. So you have to realize these pieces are connected, and if you want to make the lift more quad dominant, you have to let the knees go forward while keeping your chest and torso more vertical. Now because of that, number two, the bar position is very, very important. If you do a low bar squat, because the bar is further back on your back, it's going to mean you're more inclined, therefore the knees won't go forward as far. If you do high bar, you can get a little more upright. If you do front squat, you can get the most upright. And you've probably heard your knees can't go over your toes, but if you want big quads, they kind of have to. And I'm not saying low bar is going to be ineffective for quad growth. You can use more weight, which kind of offsets the lack of forward knee travel. Plus, your intention and your individual leverages are also very, very important. For example, when I do high bar, I'm forcing my knees forward because I'm doing that for quad growth. I could squat more if I used more posterior chain, but that's not why I am personally doing it. One thing that can help is number three, heel elevation. Now you can use squat shoes, you can put little thin plates under your heels in order to get more heel elevation. If you can, squat shoes would be ideal, but I would say they're not 100% needed. I didn't use squat shoes for the first 6 years of my training. And while a lot of people would absolutely frown on that, and I got a lot of shit for it, I had no issues in 6 years. No slippages, no instability, nothing at all. It felt actually quite stable, and I think it is a viable approach. Ideally, yeah, spend some money on squat shoes, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Which will help with number four, which is depth. I see a lot of quarter squats, I see a lot of half squats. That's not going to be the best way to get quadriceps growth. Yes, in studies it shows that it's pretty good compared to depth, but you probably also want adductors and glutes and the extra little bit of hamstring stimulation that you get. Plus, long term, half squats are not really going to go anywhere. And this is part of the reason why I don't advocate using low bar specifically for quadricep growth. Often you hit the end range of motion at your hip way sooner than at your knee. With a high bar, you get a little more depth, a little more range of motion, specifically at the knees. And then for front squat, it's much easier to get into a deep position. And for some people, depth is very, very stimulatory. Next would be stance width. Now, again, in the literature, there isn't that much difference in terms of quad stimulation when it comes to a wider stance or a narrow stance or somewhere in between. But just anecdotally, talking to a lot of people, they find that a narrower stance is more quads.
My weakness was my quads. I never had really big legs. So my off season would be spent doing high bar closer stance squat to correct a weakness.
And this possibly might come down to depth. If you're taking a fairly wide stance, you'll run out of range of motion probably at the hip or the adductors or the glutes rather than at the quads.
First of all, is to make sure your knees are in as much as possible. And this is really important because a lot of times when people do narrow squat work, their knees naturally shoot way out, they rotate their feet out, and then at that point you're defeating the purpose. Because now you're externally rotating at the hips, you're basically stretching your adductors and involving them to some extent, rather than actually giving them a break and just focusing on keeping the hips relatively internally rotated with a lot of knee extension.
Number six, tempo. I see a lot of people dive bombing their squats. You want at least some control on the way down. It doesn't have to be a 10-second eccentric or even a 3 or 4-second eccentric, but at least feeling the movement on the way down is something that is very, very helpful. I also think long term it does beat up the body a little bit less, And why would you not want more muscle with less stress on the joints? It's a no-brainer. Similarly, number 7, pauses. Learn to go down to the bottom of the squat and pause down there. It doesn't have to be for 3, 4, 5 seconds. It doesn't even have to be for a full 1 second count, but maybe pausing a few of your reps and just learning how to actually hit depth and not use the stretch reflex can get you better growth. And I find that people who don't pause their squats, especially if they're beginners, they tend to have the hips shift back as they stand up. So this is known as good morning-ing your squat. So the hips shift back, the torso inclines, the knees are also shifting back, taking that juicy tension off of the quads. You can also use partials. Now I know what you're thinking, partials? Why would you do quarter squats? But that's the thing. Use the partials in the bottom part of the range of motion. So stay in that difficult area. Don't make it easier on yourself. You can go up just part way, then go back down. Go up part way, then go back down. And I still think that most of your sets should be full range of motion. But perhaps experimenting with not locking out at the very top can be helpful. Next one, number 9, this one's pretty obvious. Reps. Reps, reps, reps. If you don't have access to heavy weight or you don't want to use heavy weight for whatever reason, you're gonna have to be doing a lot of reps. It's sort of unavoidable. Doing triples with like 40 or 50% of your 1 rep max is not gonna get it done. No matter how difficult you try to make them or how explosive you try to be, it's not gonna be effective for hypertrophy unless you're going closer to failure, and that requires a lot of reps.
Everybody want to be a bodybuilder. Right. So nobody want to lift this heavy ass weight. Yo! I do it though! Yeah!
How many reps exactly? I don't know. Probably until it gets kind of shitty, and then a few more. Until you get those slow, kind of grindy reps. On squats, you probably don't want to be failing, but especially with lighter weights, you should get kind of close. Finally, number 10, volume, specifically in sets per week. Now, normally I take a more progression-focused approach where you're trying to add weight to the bar, but if that is limited because of injury or because you just don't have access to heavier weights, you might actually want to just increase the number of sets that you're doing. That is a viable progression strategy when you can't do anything else. And so if you're combining a lot of these, let's say you're doing front squats with a slow eccentric and a pause, and you're doing it for higher reps and higher sets and just higher volume in general, and you're making it as challenging as possible, you're pushing the knees forward in the bottom position and you're keeping them forward as much as you can, standing as upright as possible, you can get a lot from fairly light weights. Woo! Compared to doing a 1 rep max on a low bar back squat where your hips are shooting way back and your knees are barely coming forward at all, it's a completely different movement. Anyway, just some stuff to keep in mind as you do your quad training. That is all for this video. Like, subscribe, share. Definitely grab a copy of my book, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.